We are live. Okay. So we covered a couple different things in the last 3 weeks, as far as, has it been 3? Maybe it's been 4. As far as the halachos of early morning are concerned. We spoke about netilas yadayim, about washing the hands. And the bottom line is you wash your hands and you make a bracha as soon as you wake up. And then you wash a second time when possible after daybreak. Then we have 3 mitzvos that we do in the morning, part of the morning davening shacharis routine, that all have specific times. We have tzitzis, the mitzvah of tzitzis, which we, to be more specific, we put on a tallis for when we daven shacharis. Then we have the mitzvah of tefillin. We wear tefillin during shacharis, and then we have the mitzvah of shema, reciting shema. In all 3 cases, the ideal time is what we call mishiyakir, when there's enough light to be able to tell between blue and white, or enough light to recognize an acquaintance at a distance of 4 amos. And that time is somewhere in between what we call alos hashachar, which is daybreak, and netzachama, sunrise. So it's not sunrise yet, so you don't have full sunlight. It's after daybreak where it's still pitch black, and you've got a little bit of light, just enough for that level that we prescribe. So that's what we're talking about right now. And so that's the ideal time for tallis, tefillin, and for shema. So in each scenario, we learned that the halachos are slightly different. First, we had tallis in Siman Yudches, and there we had a Ramah that says that there's an opinion that you're allowed to make your bracha on your tallis as early as daybreak. And the Ramah says that that's the minhag, that's the Ashkenaz, Ken Noagin. That's the accepted minhag in the Ashkenazi communities. So that's a very important detail that we encountered. When it comes to tefillin, we discovered that tefillin is unique in that the time is not coming from the Torah, but rather from the rabbis. The Rabbanan gave that time frame for the tefillin, and their logic was because of a concern that someone will fall asleep while wearing their tefillin. If they put it on too early, it's not really the time of day when people are up and running, and when a person falls asleep, maybe they will not maintain a clean body. Because it was a rabbinic concern of that nature, there were certain exceptions to the rule, such as someone who's traveling and won't have the ability to put on his tefillin later. He could put on his tefillin even earlier. And then there was discussion about whether one could recite a bracha at that time in that scenario. And it was a minority opinion, so therefore the recommendation was not to make a bracha. However, if one did make a bracha in that scenario, they would not repeat it. That's what we learned about tefillin. And then when it comes to Shema, what we learned was that Shema is interesting because Shema works like a lechatchila and a b'diavad. The lechatchila time for Shema is after the amount of light for tallis and tefillin, which is the logic being that that's the time when most people are getting up, which is the key, which is the fulfillment of the pasuk uvekumecha. When you get up, that's when you say Shema. However, the Shulchan Aruch said very clearly, b'diavad, or in a trying scenario, one is allowed to recite Shema as early as alos hashachar, as early as daybreak. And there as well, if one did it b'diavad by accident, he does not repeat Shema if it was after daybreak. So those are the 3 things we encountered. So now we're going to take all this and then let's put it into practice, and we're going to start off with Rav Moshe Feinstein. So Rav Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva, responsa, where he addresses this issue. This is in Orach Chaim Chelik Daled, his 4th section in Orach Chaim, and it's Siman Vav, Siman number 6. And he was asked a question by his mechutin, Rabbi Yitzchak Isaac. No, one second. Hassani Kibni Harav Agadol of Moshe David Tendler Shlita. Excuse me. This was Rav Moshe Tendler. Rav Moshe Tendler asked this question. It's interesting that he mentions both his son-in-law and his mechutanim. Anyways, the question was asked of Rav Moshe from his son-in-law, Rav Moshe Tendler, and that's the story. So here's the question. So the question is, what do you do about this very, very common scenario that we've discussed, where you have a shul and you have your davening schedule, and you have balabatim, you have your congregants that need to get to work. And when they change the clocks or whatever the case may be, it becomes very difficult to daven late enough to be able to have that amount of light that we described, to be able to be within the ideal time for tallis and for tefillin and for Shema. So what are you supposed to do? So the first thing that Rav Moshe starts with is, he starts out by saying that when it comes to Shema, the Shulchan Aruch that we learned says that you can daven as early as daybreak if you're in a shasat chak, if you're in a difficult scenario. And so the first thing Rav Moshe lays down is that a scenario where someone needs to get to work, and it's going to be a problem with his career, with his employment, with his income, his parnasa, if he waits until Mishiyakir. Rav Moshe says, Vade in ones gadol mizeh. There's no ones greater than that. Even though the Shulchan Aruch gave a very specific scenario of someone who's traveling and he has a caravan and the caravan won't wait for him, etc., says Rav Moshe Feinstein, that is one example. That's the example that the Shulchan Aruch gives. But any other scenario where a person has something out of his control, there's nothing that he can do about it, and it's making it impossible for him to daven later at the more preferred time, that writes of Moshe Feinstein is also considered an ones, something that's out of his control, which would give him the allowance to go ahead and daven as early as Alos HaShachar. So that's as far as Shema is concerned. Now, the big question that we have is, how do we determine Alos HaShachar? How do we determine daybreak? So this is a very important thing, which is the very next point that Rav Moshe Feinstein addresses, and this is a really, really critical piece. So Rav Moshe begins with a Gemara in Pesachim. The Gemara in Maseches Pesachim Daf Tzadi Daled Amud Aleph 94a. The Gemara there states that the amount of time from Alos HaShachar until Netzach Hama, from daybreak until sunrise, is the amount of time of 4 mil. The amount of time to travel 4 mil. A mil is in reality a distance, but it is commonly used by the Gemara as a measurement of time by the amount of time it takes for the average person to walk that distance. Now, how long is that? How long is a mil? Rav Moshe cites the opinion of the Shach, which is the well-known opinion in Siman Samach Tes of Cotton Chafei, that says a mil is a third of an hour minus 1/30th, otherwise known as 18 minutes. That's where you get your 18 minutes from. So, writes of Moshe Feinstein, if we follow this opinion of the Shach, that a mil is 18 minutes, so then when will Alos HaShachar be? What do you say, Chaim?
I'm not so good at math.
Not so good at math? Okay. No worries. Dimitri, you want to give a try to it?
Good question.
There's 4 mil from sunrise, from daybreak until sunrise. And the Shach says that a mil is 18 minutes. So how many minutes are there from daybreak to sunrise? Did you turn off your camera so you could use your calculator?
Yes, I did.
Busted. Okay. 72 minutes. Beautiful. Okay, here we go, guys. That's okay. You don't need to be a math whiz as long as you're a Torah whiz. That's what counts. Okay, so here we go. So when we work with the Zmanim for the early morning, we always start with sunrise and we work backwards. And the reason for that is very practical because sunrise is something very easy. You look and you see if the sun is over the horizon, and it's very measurable. And you can get a pretty clear picture of when sunrise is in your location at any given day. So we always take sunrise and we work backwards. So when it comes to daybreak, we're going to take sunrise and we're going to work backwards 72 minutes. So if, for example, sunrise tomorrow in Cincinnati will be 7:25 a.m., which it is, then that means that 72 minutes, daybreak will be when? It will be 6:25 will be an hour earlier, and then minus another 12 minutes will put us at 6:13. Oh, wow, 6:13, that's a nice number. 613 mitzvahs. So daybreak tomorrow, according to the 72-minute calculation, will be 6:13. Now, as an aside, you know what, I'm going to hold this thought until we jump into my Zmanim, because you'll appreciate it much better. So this is relevant to a number of things, just while we're on the topic. This is relevant to a number of things, not just relevant to Shema. It's relevant to many things which are determined by the day. One of the ones which is very relevant is a fast. So fast days, minor fast days, start at the beginning of the day and the end at the end of the day, right? So what is the beginning of the day? The beginning of the day is not sunrise, it's alos shachar. It's daybreak. So how you calculate daybreak, let's say you want to get up early and you want to have a coffee and a snack and a couple cups of water before the fast starts, right? That's something that I will very commonly do. So you need to know how early you've got to finish your coffee and your snack, right? So that is where daybreak is very critical. Calculating daybreak. It's particularly relevant for the fast, which is coming up in a little bit more than a month. Asar b'Teves, the 10th of Teves, because that's the easiest one of all of them, because it falls out in the middle of the winter where sunrise is super, super late. So to be able to get up, your chances are, a good chance you're going to be up before daybreak anyways. For sure you, Dimitri, you'll be up, no question about it. You could have a whole feast before daybreak if you wanted. So that's the story with the Asar b'Teves. Excuse me, with the fasting. So that's the shach, 72 minutes. Now, this doesn't give a ton of time for people that need to get to work. Just for example, tomorrow, daybreak won't be till 6:13 in the morning. 6:13 might be too late for some people that need to get to work real early. So Rav Moshe goes on to discuss other opinions. And that other opinion that he has is the Rambam. The Rambam it's interesting in terms of the source, the location where you find this Rambam. Just give me 1 second. I want to jump ahead in the calendar and see where daybreak will be in the dead of the winter. Let's say right around December 31st. That's going to be real rough. Yeah, exactly. Sunrise is 7:57. You hear that? That means that daybreak won't be until 6:45. Daybreak. That's like the earliest of the early. It's not until 6:45. That, my friends, is rough. So for anyone that needs to get to work. So Rav Moshe wants to get creative. And Rav Moshe, I shouldn't say it that way. Rav Moshe is searching for something that will help out here. And what Rav Moshe discovers is a Rambam. The Rambam is actually, in the Rambam's Pirush HaMishnayos, he's explaining a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah Maseches Pesachim which is talking about chametz. Very interesting Mishnah that's talking about a person has a piece of dough, and he's worried that maybe this dough became chametz, but it doesn't have any clear signs of becoming chametz. It doesn't have any cracks in it. It doesn't have any like the surface turning a little bit of a pale color, which are some of the signs that the Gemara talks about that tell you when a dough is starting to rise. It doesn't have any of the signs. So how do I know? How do I know if this is chametz or not? So the Gemara says, the very famous Gemara, of a mill. If the dough was sitting for 1 mil of time, then it is chametz. So now this is where we get the idea of 18 minutes for matzah. Because according to the Shach, how long is a mil? To 18 minutes. So if your dough was kneaded and it sat for 18 minutes, it'll become chametz in those 18 minutes. That's where you get the idea of 18 minutes for matzah. You got to bake it before 18 minutes. The Rambam doesn't say 18 minutes. The Rambam there on that Mishnah says, how long is a mil? 2/5 of an hour. Approximately 2/5 of an hour. So now I'll do the math for you this time. 2/5 of an hour.
Of the halachic hour.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that.
It could be different.
I'm sorry?
It could be different depending on the time of year.
Yes. That's important. And that's important regarding the first thing that we said, the daybreak being 72 minutes, that's also working with halachic hours. So I'm looking for the,
Right.
This one I'm looking for. Give me a second. I'm just doing a little math for you guys. Okay, there it is. So just doing the math. So 2/5 of an hour being 60 minutes, you divide that by 5, gives you 12 minutes. And then you multiply that by 2, it gives you 24 minutes. 24 minutes in a mill, significantly longer than the Shach's 18 minutes. Now, if you plug that into 4 mil from sunrise to daybreak, you're going to get a crazy long, crazy early. Let's just do that. Let's run the numbers. 24 times 4 is going to be what? 96 minutes. That's more than an hour and a half. That means that if you take the Rambam at face value, you could say Shema as early as 96 minutes before sunrise. That's really a big leniency, a very significant difference from the Shach of 72 minutes. So Rav Moshe,
We're assuming that each hour that he was referring to is 60 minutes?
no, I'm using this, meaning, how should I say this? You know what? Chaim, you're asking a really interesting question. Is this going to be, will this depend on Shos Manius? I'm not sure that it will. Meaning
The Rambam said it, maybe he was going by the second hour?
Meaning, I think what this is not necessarily going to depend on on halachic hours, because if you think it through a little bit, we're dealing here with the rate of the motion of the sun. I mean, how quickly does the sun rise, and how quickly does the sun set?
Uh-huh.
How soon do you have daybreak relative to sunrise? And honestly, I don't know. Does the sun, here, 1 second, let me put the recording on pause for a minute. Okay, so I'm not such an expert, but it seems that if anything, it's the other way around, that it depends on the time of year regarding sunrise and sunset, and it works, and the speed of the sun rising and the sun setting is slower in the winter and in the summer, and when I guess faster is the word, during the spring and the fall. So go figure. But so that makes me wonder about these shows manios, because this whole thing about halachic hours that you're raising, Chaim, is when you're dealing with mitzvos that have a certain number of hours into the day. So for example, the latest time for Shema is 3 hours into the day. The latest time for Shemona Esrei is 4 hours into the day. So what's 3 hours into the day? Well, it depends on the day. Follow? But when we're dealing with daybreak, versus sunrise, that I don't know if that's going to depend on shows manios, because when the first morning light starts to come, that should not depend on the length of the daylight hours. Okay, but that's really, you're asking a great question, Chaim, which really requires further research. But my assumption is that this will not be shows menus. That's my current assumption. This is going to be minutes. Okay, getting back to Rav Moshe. So the bottom line is that we have the Rambam. The Rambam who says 2/5 of an hour. Now that 2/5 of an hour, Rav Moshe points out that it's not so simple to interpret that as a full 24 minutes. There's a Chok Yaakov and there's a Tosos Yom Tov, and there's some significant debate about exactly how to measure the Rambam. And there is an alternative that the Rambam's 2/5 of an hour really means 22.5 minutes. And 22.5 minutes will then yield a different amount of time. That's his mill. That's how long a mill is for the Rambam. So then if you take that number and you multiply it for times 4 to get to your time for daybreak, you're going to get an even 90 minutes. An even 90 minutes for an hour and a half. So now, for the critical point of the Rav Moshe writes that if somebody needs to get to work and they are in a shasat chak, they're in a difficult situation, the halacha is that you are allowed to rely on a minority. Second. Okay, bottom line is Rav Moshe says that if someone is a shasat chak, if someone needs to get to work and they can't daven any later, they could even rely on the Rambam. So that means that not only can they say Shema before Mishayak, or before the amount of time for tallis and tefillin, they could go all the way to daybreak. Not only that, says Rav Moshe, if 72 minutes is not good enough, you could push it all the way up to 90 minutes. 90 minutes before sunrise is late enough to be able to recite Shema for someone who absolutely must get to work right away. Okay, so let's pause here for a second. The big question that we have yet to discuss, which I think we're going to need to get to next week, is what do you do with tallis and tefillin if you're going to say Shema that early? That's way before the time for tallis and tefillin. But before I do that, I just want to take a moment. I want to end off today's class with showing you how this plays out in a practical sense. And I want to go back to that Maizmanim website again, which I hope you start to make use of it, because it's really a very powerful tool. Here it is. So let me do my share screen and we'll all get on the same page about this. Second. Okay, there it is. So here's my Zman. Let me change the date back to tomorrow. Okay, tomorrow in Cincinnati, Eastern Standard Time. Sunrise will be 7:25 and 4 seconds, okay? Now, what do we see here? Oh, so what do they put in for daybreak, they put in 6:01 a.m. Now, 6:01 a.m. is more than 72 minutes before 7:25. Okay? Let's clarify
Right.
that. Let's make that perfectly clear. Here's my calendar. Here's my calculator. Can you see my calculator? No?
No.
How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So let's see here. How do I want to do this? This is going to be harder than I thought it would be to use this calculator. Okay, the bottom line is 6:01 is 24 minutes and an hour before sunrise. So that's 84 minutes, right? So what in the world is that? So here they explain where this 84 minutes comes from. It's 72 minutes as 16.1 degrees. What does that mean? So what they explain here is that there's different ways to calculate the 72 minutes. The 72 minutes could be fixed 72 minutes. It also could be measured in degrees of the sun relative to the horizon. Let's go back to here. Let me demonstrate that a little better this way. Here we go. Here we go. So here's 72 minutes fixed is 6:13 for tomorrow morning. 72 minutes in degrees is 6:01. So they're taking 72 minutes, but they're converting it into the degrees of the sun relative to the horizon as 16.1. So therefore, at certain times of the year, it'll fluctuate to more or less than 72 minutes. You follow that? That's an
I
important
think
thing.
so.
I'm sorry?
I said I think I get it.
You think you get it? Okay.
The degrees is the sun on the horizon, we said.
Yeah, so we could read that in more depth. Here's 90 minutes as well, but again, as degrees, not fixed 90 minutes. 542. Okay, let's read into this a little bit more. Oops, excuse me. So this section is what we read so far. Now we have two opinions. We have 72 minutes and we have 90 minutes. Okay, place to place. Okay, let's read just the bold here. Taking these facts into account, the Gra and others ruled that halachos shachar cannot be defined in terms of fixed amount of time before sunrise, and tzeitz kochavim cannot be defined in terms of fixed amount of time after sunset. So he's learning that all the times that the Gemara uses are referring to the equinox days, i.e. the months of Nisan and Tishrei, where the night and day are equal length. And they're referring specifically to Bavel and Eretz Yisrael.
Right.
So here they explain exactly where they get their degrees, but that's the idea. That's how they do it. You take 72 minutes on the days of the equinox in Eretz Yisrael, and what degree is the sun relative to the horizon at that time of day? So it's 16.
I see. So they use
it's 16.1 degrees. Then that's the number that they lock into place. 16.1 degrees. That's how high up the sun needs to be. And then they just use that for every single day, every location. And the number of minutes before sunrise will vary.
Very clever.
That's how it works. Okay, beautiful. Okay, so you know what? Let's pause let's stop our class here for today. Let me stop my share screen. There it is. If any of you have any questions about what we did so far tonight, the bottom line of what we focused on tonight is just to recap. We spoke about how to calculate daybreak. We have two opinions, 72 minutes and 90 minutes. We saw that that really is not necessarily calculated by plain fixed minutes, but it's according to the Gra, it is calculated by numbers of degrees of the sun relative to the horizon. And therefore it fluctuates based on the time of year and the location. And we also had the critical point of Moshe Feinstein, who his psak is that someone who needs to get to work and they can't wait around to daven later because they need to get to work, that is considered a shasat chak, which has two leniencies that Rav Moshe is willing to allow. Number one is to allow reciting Shema as early as daybreak, not waiting for that amount of light for tallis and tefillin. Number two, for taking the more lenient opinion about the definition of daybreak, the 90 minutes Rambam, which has the earlier time for daybreak. He's willing to do both of those two things for someone who needs to get to work. Okay, so next week we'll continue with Rav Moshe and we'll discuss what he recommends for this fellow that needs to get to work and is going to say Shema very early. What's he going to do about his tallis and tefillin? Okay, do you guys have any questions you want to discuss before we sign off? You're good to
I
go.
can't think of any.
All righty. Well, if you do think of any, you know my email address. You are welcome to reach out. Okay, I wish you guys both a wonderful night. Yeshakayach.